There are several lenses in the OM system lineup that work well for birds and wildlife. My pick is the ED 100 to 400 mm IS zoom. I like the short end of the zoom, 200 mm equivalent, for larger wildlife, and I like the long end of the zoom, 800 mm equivalent, for small birds and larger birds at a distance. And I have the full range between for framing whatever I need. That the lens is relatively lightweight and compact is a bonus, as is the fact that it focuses at just over 4 feet for an effective 0.5x long-range macro when I need it. I find it to be tack sharp across its range, and though it does not have the best possible image stabilization with the OM-1, that is reserved for pro-class lenses, the IS is still good enough so that I can easily hand-hold the lens at 1/640th of a second, even at 800 mm equivalent. And it is relatively inexpensive as 400 mm lenses go. Then there is the ED 300 mm Pro IS. Some think this lens is even sharper than the 100 to 400 mm zoom, and it is a full stop faster, so more effective in low light, and it does have the best-in-class image stabilization with the OM-1. However, for me, the limitation of the shorter focal length and the inability to change my field of view as needed keeps me from investing in one. I would need the 1.4 or 2x extender for reach, and even then, I would still lack zoom. Then too, at closest focus distance, it only does 0.24x, half of what the 100 to 400 reaches, so not so great for macro work. And the low-light performance of the f3.6 zoom with the OM-1 is enough for my purposes. Finally, there is the newer ED 150 to 400 mm f4.5 Pro IS zoom. If this lens were not so much larger and heavier than the 100 to 400, and so much more expensive, I would own one. All the advantages of the 300 mm and none, except size, weight, and cost, of the drawbacks. And with the built-in 1.3x teleconverter, it reaches 500 millimeters for a 1000 millimeter equivalent field of view, and a macro magnification of something like 0.75x, a great bird and wildlife lens. Some people like the little 40 to 150 zoom and stack it with a 2x extender to reach the 600 millimeter minimum I feel you need for small birds and distant wildlife, but really, no. Which brings us to fieldcraft. First, I highly recommend the cotton carrier for the OM-1 and any of the lenses above, except no substitutes. The original and authentic cotton carrier is the one to get. It is just designed better, it's made of better materials, it works better and faster than any of its imitators. Once you get used to mounting and unmounting the camera and lens, you can do it in less than 3 seconds, and having the camera securely on your chest while moving around is so much better than having it hanging off your shoulder. You will need a backup strap for when the camera and lens are actually in use. I recommend the Peak Design or the Black Rapid straps attached to the camera tripod socket, while your cotton carrier mount is attached to the socket on the lens. Best of both worlds. Belt and suspenders. As a parenthesis here, I have actually taken the tripod foot off my 100 to 400 millimeter zoom, as I never use it. When I need extra support, I use my beanbag head monopod. I have a video on my point-and-shoot playlist on making one. The tripod foot just adds weight to the lens and can get in the way when hand-holding. If I do need it, it slips back onto the lens in a second. Without the tripod foot, I attach the cotton carrier mount to the tripod socket on the body of the OM-1 and still use the Peak Design slider strap attached to the strap lugs, all secure, and it's even easier to get the camera on and off the carrier. In addition, it makes the whole rig feel much more compact, and you save some weight. Still, hand-holding a long lens is a skill that has to be developed. The primary rule is to support the camera and lens with the bones of your arms and hands, not with the muscles. Muscles tire, bones do not. Muscles flex, bones do not. Therefore, you need to adopt a stance that places the supporting arm directly under the lens, with your elbow tucked into your body and supported by it as much as possible. You can do this off-shoulder with your body turned 1/4 toward your subject, or face-on with the camera and lens right in front of you and your head turned slightly to see through the viewfinder. Either way, if you do it right, you should be able to relax your muscles, supporting the camera on the bones of one arm and hand, while the other hand guides the camera for framing and operates the controls. Practice. The other solution is to build and use a beanbag monopod using the instructions in one of my point-and-shoot videos. You have 3 custom modes. Spend time practicing with each one. Go out just to practice. Find a good bird spot, a good birds in flight spot, and a good wildlife spot. A local park or any kind of pond or marsh is good for birds. The beach for birds in flight, or even better, the local dump. Even if you live downtown, there are always pigeons and house sparrows. If you can't find a wildlife spot, practice on cows, sheep, goats, dogs, and cats. You're not, at this point, looking for great photos. You're just developing confidence in the camera and your custom modes, and getting used to switching modes as needed. Since the focus target area is so important to your success with any custom mode, practice changing it and even moving it around the sensor using the multi-selector button until you are comfortable that you can change it as needed and quickly in the field. Do not wait to practice changing the focus target area until your first trip to Costa Rica or Uganda. Practice it in your backyard or off the balcony in your apartment building until it gets programmed into your muscles. Make sure you remember which buttons do what. This is good advice for any reprogrammed button, but especially important for the buttons assigned to your custom modes. Take the camera out and review how you have the buttons set up at least once a week. I know, that sounds boring, but you'll be very thankful you spent the time when the resplendent quetzal pops its head out of the nest hole in Costa Rica and then takes flight. No fumbles. That's the goal. The first burst of shots of anything significant, be it bird or beast, are taken any old how. Just get the camera up and burst away. Then, if the subject is still in sight, check to make sure you're in the right custom mode. Begin to think about how to frame to the best effect. Play with different zoom settings. Put the bird or beastie in different parts of the frame. Move yourself to get slightly different angles and lines of sight and backgrounds. Begin to think about the best framing and the best shot. But all this happens after your first point-and-shoot burst. Don't forget how easy exposure compensation is to use on the OM-1. It's just a roll of that front thumb wheel away. Though the modifications we have made to program will take care of maybe 90% of exposure challenges, there are still cases where some compensation, either negative or positive, will help. Birds in flight against anything but a clear blue sky are going to need a little bit of extra light. Twiddle the thumb wheel to the plus side, maybe to plus 0.7. White birds, especially in sunlight, will show more feather detail if you set exposure compensation to something like negative 0.7. Is that giraffe standing with its head in the shadow of the tree? Get a little more light on the subject. On the other hand, don't overthink it. Most of the time, with most subjects, EV compensation will not be needed. Do not use it as your final ditch way of being in control. Let the camera do its job. And don't set your expectations too high. Some shots are just so heavily backlit or so poorly back and front lit that there is nothing you can do to get a satisfying shot. Birds in the top branches of a tree against a plain white cloudy sky, good luck. Some shots just can't be done. This one might be worthy of a whole video on its own, maybe soon. And while we're talking about extra control features, there are a few body buttons you might want to be made aware of. Don't forget, we set the function leveler around the AEL button to change between single frame and continuous autofocus. This can be handy when the focus keeps popping off your bird or beast of choice. Setting autofocus to single frame and then half pressing the shutter release will lock focus on whatever is under the focus target area at that moment. Then there are the 2 buttons on the cap of the on-off lever on the left side of the top of the camera. The front one gives you access to your drive mode settings. Want to switch to SH1 or SH2 for a burst of intense action or a fast-flying bird? Press the button and rotate the rear wheel. Do the same if you want to try one of the Pro Capture modes. The back button on the off and on cap gives access to both the metering pattern settings and the AF mode settings. The function lever on the AEL button is handier for changing between single frame and continuous autofocus, but should you find the need to change metering patterns, to spot, for instance, for really tricky lighting, the front thumb wheel will do that after pressing the back on-off cap button. Finally, the back thumb wheel in program mode controls program shift. Program will always select the largest aperture and the fastest shutter speed consistent with the light levels, so you won't have to adjust the program for shallow depth of field, and you are unlikely to be able to select a faster shutter speed. But you might want to select a smaller aperture for greater depth of field, or a slower shutter speed to blur motion, moving water for instance. The back thumb wheel allows you to do this without over or underexposing the image by adjusting both aperture and shutter speed at the same time to maintain a balanced exposure. That's what program shift means. Above all, when in the field, do not try to outthink the camera. You set it for the best results, trust it to do its job, and get on with yours. Only you can put yourself in the right place at the right time. Only you can find and frame the birds or beast. Only you can decide what is worth framing, or how it best fits in the frame. You do you, and let the camera do everything it can for you. All that matters in the end are the satisfying images. You get no extra credit for doing it the hard way. No one cares. Just find and frame what needs finding and framing. And don't let anyone tell you you're not a real photographer because you let the camera do the grunt work or because you shoot in JPEG. Anyway, a camera that is able to do everything it can for you is what you paid the big bucks for. And that's Steve Ingram's easy nature photography method in a nutshell.